The last thing you want is for something to go wrong with your plumbing, but it happens a lot. And the last thing you want when there's water spraying all over your kitchen or your toilet is overflowing is looking up reviews on which plumber you should call. So let me save you some time. Call the Art of Plumbing. They're always on time. They can locate the problem and fix it right away. They even help with solutions to stop any future problems. Save time. Call the Art of Plumbing today. 541-951-9405.
Perspectives change with broken strings and worn out souls. Years ago and some with wings. Some are old, some undersold. To grow we need to rely on and try on some other people's shoes. Some other people's shoes.
Welcome into Other People's Shoes. I, of course, am your host, Neil Matthews. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm excited because, it's show day, so it's always exciting on show day. But how about this? Listen to this bio, if you will. So hang with me. He's an award-winning filmmaker, novelist, impromptu comedian, and he's the host of Truce Podcast. We're going to get to that momentarily. He is also an author of the novel Cradle Robber, a book for tweens. So I'm in that category. I have one of those. Called How to Survive a Money-Making Summer, and a writer, director, producer. Did you get that? Writer, producer, director, all those in one, of films such as Bringing Up Bobby and Between the Walls. He's also available for public speaking events. So if you got one of those coming up, this guy might be a good candidate for that. And also church conferences and churches as well. Help me welcome in my guest, Chris. Chris, how are you? I always butcher last names, so I try to leave those out. But go ahead and give the last name if you don't mind.
It's Staron, Staron, like you're staring at something.
Got it. See, my Hooked on Phonics day apparently did not work out so well. So,
well, no, it's phonetic. I don't know. I don't know why. It should be Staron. I have a lot of people call me Starton or Stanton. I don't know why. Yeah, it's not the easiest last name.
I'm pretty fortunate. I have an easy last name, Matthews. Pretty easy. I always say Dave Matthews. Most people know that guy. I was like, yeah, that's my uncle. That's what I said in high school. But nowadays, I guess he's not as cool as he used to be. So I actually now say at work quite often, I'll say Neil, like Neil Diamond, the singer. And most people are like, oh, I love Neil Diamond. So sometimes I'll mess with people and be like, yeah, it's actually pronounced Diamond when I give my last name. And they kind of like have this like puzzled like look or, kind of awkward silence. Like I don't understand that. And so anyway, it's kind of fun.
Yeah. Are you familiar with the movie What About Bob? One of the great comedies.
I am. Yeah. Bill Murray.
Yeah,
for sure.
There's that amazing line in there that, there are two kinds of people in this world, Dr. Marvin. Those that like Neil Diamond and those who don't. My ex-wife loved Neil Diamond. And it's such a great line.
I should actually find that. And I'm sure there's some copyright infringements, but maybe just like sample that, just work that into the show somehow. I don't know. We'll figure that out.
Yeah. Oh, it's such a great movie.
Chris, thanks so much for coming on today. I know you have so much going on with your show and just all the stuff that you're a part of. And I want to get into that, definitely give you some time for that. But, of course, we got to answer the most important question that you'll probably answer of all time. And that, of course, is what size shoes do you wear?
What size shoes? I have little tiny lady feet, so I'm wearing 8.5.
8.5s? Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
No judgment.
Tiny feet.
No judgment. Okay.
That's okay.
And then, is there a style or brand or shoe that you like to wear?
Yeah, I wear Eddie Bauers shoes. And if they're out there and they want to pay me, I wear a lot of their stuff. First of all, like the small town I live in, it's one of the few men's clothing stores in town. The next closest men's clothing store is really like 2 hours away. And so, first of all, it's like the only option, but also, I hike a lot, in the summer. And so they make great shoes that don't change shape too much as they wear out. Cause, I've gotten blisters before from old shoes where your toes are rattling around. because they're old and you've stretched everything. But so Eddie Bauers, yeah, if they want to give me a little money, I would love that because I'm always talking about them.
That's awesome. See, I am not afraid to name products on show, especially on my show, because I think, what if one day they like tune in and they're like, oh, you've been talking about us. Well, here's some money. And as podcasters, we struggle with, right, the financial end of things. So that's fun.
Oh, yeah.
Since we're talking about shoes, full disclosure, I am actually wearing my Kobe Bryant Crazy 8s. So they have an 8 embroidered on them, and it's the kind of gold, Laker gold, and then it's outlined in the purple. So I wore those today. I don't know why. I just grabbed them. There's a lot of shoes, by the way, to grab in my closet. So
okay,
yeah. Embarrassed
That's
to say
thing.
that. I kind of talk about it every show. I probably need to stop talking about my shoe collection so much, but it's, I don't know. Anyway.
You could probably ask every guest, like, what is the thing that you have too many of? And for me, it's probably sleeping bags, because I have 4 sleeping bags just for me.
Sleeping bags. What a thing to have. That's interesting. Okay. All right. Again, no judgment. I'm not sitting in a seat of judgment. Okay. So so on to our first question. This is a fun one. I found this one, actually kind of discovered it through actually a church setting. And so I wanted to ask you this, because I'm always curious what people's answers are to this. And that's this. If you were a word, so you're a word, so Chris is now a word in the dictionary, you and your personality and everything that comes with it, you're in the dictionary. How are you defined if we were to look you up in the dictionary?
I would probably say Chris Staron, constantly overthinking things. Sometimes thinks he's funny and drives his friends nuts with his strange interests. Maybe that would be it.
So when we go to like look up you in the dictionary, that's what we'd find?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. Maybe throw in like serial producer, because if I try to not make something like a podcast or a book or something, I start to go nuts. I basically don't have a choice. I kind of have to keep doing this.
So that leads into my next thing, is this whole idea of, your podcast and how it all started, because I got to be honest, I've listened to a couple episodes prior to you coming on, and that's always good to do, right? So you kind of get an idea of who you're in the room with. But I got to be honest, like, for me, history was never exciting for me, but you, in your own unique way, have kind of piqued my interest back to this history and this, kind of revolution that the church is associated with. So if you can, talk about your show and why you started it, and maybe why folks should go listen. Yeah.
Well, thank you, first of all, for listening. It's called Truth. That's TRUCE. And it's a show that basically explores all the things that have glommed onto Christianity. And we try to figure out how those things got there and how we can do better. And I find that a lot of the disagreements that we have with each other, with those people, whoever those people are to you, is because we don't actually know what our history is and what we're talking about. So frequently I find we can have more compassion if we know what people have been through and what especially people groups have been through. And so we're always studying a lot of interesting history, stuff that's like, I never thought I would be looking this up, but that really impacts the Christian church, or else whoever those people are to us. So right now we're in a series where we're exploring how the how communism in Russia impacted the American Christian church, and that story sounds so drab and so boring, but it's been fascinating, because you would never think that a revolution that took place on the other side of the world would have such a big impact. But really, it has greatly changed the American Christian church. So that's our story for this year.
No, and I think that's what I'm referring to, is like I never would have associated, I mean, USSR essentially is what we're talking about, right? That kind of time period. Okay. Yeah. Yep. I thought I had that Soviet Union time frame, right? But to me, I never would have even correlated Christianity in Russian. I mean, that just, it seems like almost like military intelligence, Duke being a good basketball team. I mean, those things just don't seem to go together.
Yeah. Well, it's, I kept reading a lot of books and talking to people. I'm an incessant talker. Sorry to my friends. They already know that. But it kept coming up. And especially now, if you look at just the debates going on around politics, around, people like Bernie Sanders, communism and socialism are coming up all the time, often being misused. And then also in the 1900s, some very formative years for the Christian church, when you start seeing the rise of evangelicals. You see the Dwight Eisenhower and that era where we added "In God We Trust" onto monuments and things. It was a fairly new invention in the United States, that phrase. You start to see people try to tie, because communism is inherently atheistic. And so when we saw Russia, our enemy in the Cold War, go communistic and atheistic, we said, okay, well, we should fight that by holding on to capitalism even tighter and tying that to Christianity. And so you start to see oil and gas companies be tied to Christianity. You see politics going even heavier on it, the rise of the moral majority, the rise of the far right. And so you see it's just a lot of things that were really just sort of reactions to communism. You start to see the United States acting more like an empire, because Russia is, creeping further and further into the world, like the British Empire and the French and the Spanish empires used to. And we start to say, okay, well, in order to combat that, we need to then go and reach out. And that includes like Africa and trying to stop the spread of communism in Africa, not maybe by taking over in Africa, but by putting our own leaders in place, or by trying to do missionary efforts to stop the threat of atheistic communism. So it's a huge story, and it is absolutely fascinating. And it really impacts who we are now. And right now we're taking an interesting turn where we've been talking about Russia now for 4 or 5 months, and now we're talking about what is the United States. So it's kind of a giant question, because a lot of us have different ideas of what the U.S. is. Some people say it's a Christian nation. Other people say there's no such thing as a Christian nation. Were the founding fathers Christians, deists, or something else? And is the United States an empire? And is empire good or bad, or something else? So there's just a lot of really big questions we're heading into.
Yeah, and like I said, if you're a history buff, this is a show to definitely take a look at, because to me it was fascinating. Even not the history novice, well, I guess that's what I am. I'm really just a history novice. Like I'm not well versed with all of that, but that's some good stuff. And like I said, I'm intrigued to see where it goes, and hopefully others will tune in for that for sure. Yeah.
And I mean, you've heard other history podcasts, and sometimes they can be boring. But I'm always trying to. When I was a high school Bible study leader, it's like small group leader in our church, I would see the kids kind of like start to fade off, and like we were saying before this thing started, teenagers need a lot of sleep, right? And they don't tend to come to church having slept a lot. So my goal was always like, how can I get them actively engaged? And so what I often did was I would incorporate games into the lesson. So when we were doing an overview of the Bible, we started at the top of the stairs, and then you would go down to the stairs, like rush down as fast as you can, and that would symbolize the fall of man. And then we had like the Israelites being slaves in Egypt, so we had them build a tower out of cups. Build a pyramid out of cups. And so we built this whole obstacle course that would give them an overview of the Bible, basically. And so in just talking about the different stations in the obstacle course, we laid out the history of the Bible and the overarching story of the Bible. And I try to do a lot of that same stuff in the podcast. So like I've got an episode coming up at the end of June where we already played this, and I'm editing it now. But I created a game of capture the flag that forces the players to talk about empire, resources, and military bases. And are those things good? Are they bad? And what would a Christian response look like to those things? And so you can actually hear us talking about all these complex moral questions while playing a game of capture the flag. And so that's the whole goal of the show, is to make it fun and interesting, and to try to break down those barriers that stop us from talking about really important things.
Yeah, and I think, being an old youth guy myself, from the sound of it, is kind of what you were. You have to make things interactive, and you have to make things exciting. And to me, that's what I love most about your show, is just the music that comes along with it. You really feel like you're, in this culture. You're in that moment. You're in, Mother Russia, if you will. And so that part's been kind of fun, honestly, to kind of hear and kind of,
Praise God.
Have that kind of audio transformation, if you will. So that I'm serious. Like, I don't know what you're doing audio wise, but it's good stuff. So getting into this, where does that vision come from? Like, what on earth possessed you to be like, you know what, I'm gonna do this show, and here's how I'm gonna do it, and I'm not sure how all the pieces are gonna work yet, but I'm gonna make this work. What was kind of the visionary behind that?
Yeah, well, I used to make independent Christian films, like you said, bringing up Bobby in Between the Walls, and then the market kind of fell apart for those, so my brother and I stopped doing them. But we initially, 13 years ago or so, had a podcast before anybody really knew what a podcast was, and I loved making that show, and it was supposedly just to advertise for the movies. But there was nobody listening to podcasts at the time, so it was kind of a bad idea at the time. So I always kind of wanted to go back into audio. And then I have a lot of friends who are kind of all over the spectrum, politically, religiously, and there was a lot of anger going on in my friend group and even in my extended family and in the country, because this was leading up to the 2016 election and in the United States. And I just realized a lot of the things, again, people were arguing about were because they didn't know what they were talking about, or they didn't have a historic perspective on it. So I wanted to kind of lay out the history for them, maybe I don't always draw conclusions for the audience on the show, but I always want them to kind of understand whoever those people are, and just kind of see what they're talking about. Because I feel like we can relate, and we can have better communication if we do that. And then also, we as Christians, if our ultimate goal is to share the love of Christ with people, if we're angry and we created like a those people category, we're going to lose that battle. We can get distracted so easily. And so my goal was to really call my Christian friends back to the main mission. And so you'll hear that the show keeps calling people back to, how does this impact our witness? How does this impact our ability to share the Lord with people? Because that is our real mission. As much as we'd like people to vote for our candidates, our mission isn't to save the world by politics. It's to share the already completed work of Christ.
Yeah, and again, I think that's what's so fascinating just about your show is the fact that it really does kind of leave it not so much up in the air, but really does kind of have to bring people to a point of decision. Like, do I want to really trust this? Do I really want to believe in this? And I think you also cause, at least for me, you caused me to go back and kind of rethink a lot of, like, do I really believe that? Is this really true? And so I again, just really good stuff. So if you had one episode to pick, which I know it's like, I don't know if you have kids or not, but it's like asking what's your favorite kid. Well, mine's easy because I just have one, but I mean, if you only had one show to pitch to ABC or, some big, I don't know, radio conglomerate, like, hey, we're going to, simulcast your show. what's one show you're going to pitch to them that people really need to go listen to?
Yeah, the tough thing is there's a favorite, like a bunch of different people have had favorites. So I'll tell you everybody else's favorite. How about that?
So you personally don't have a favorite?
I've got a few. It keeps changing. There's one that came out recently called Godless Utopia. And it's about propaganda in the Soviet Union. And what the Soviets did was that they used the national sins of the United States, like executing the first woman by electric chair. They used that against the Christian church in their visual propaganda. So I got to talk to an author of a book who compiled a bunch of these visual works of art, and it's an amazing book called Godless Utopia that I think would make an amazing coffee table book if you don't have kids, because there's some traumatizing images in there. But it would be an amazing conversation starter. So I love that episode. And then I love the one, the history of the Russian Christian Church. And then also the new one that came out, the faith of America's founding fathers. But I think the one that is best for new listeners is the one, I think it's called Pyramid and Ponzi Schemes. No, multi-level marketing, pyramid and Ponzi schemes. But it focuses on, it's a 4-part series on how pyramid schemes target religious people, especially Christians, and try to use gospel-sounding language to make us sell products in an illegitimate way. Because over 99% of people who join a multi-level marketing plan lose money. And these target Christians. So.
I'm so excited about that one, actually, because I'll tell you, here's my story. So, and then I want to get back on this topic per se, but
yeah.
So I'm 40 now. So I was 23, 24. I was running a cell phone store, U.S. Cellular, we were an agent location for them. And so anyway, this guy comes in one day and, his phone broke. So we fix his phone, and, I just love people, and I love making people smile. And, at the end of the day, if I can put $1 in my pocket and a smile on someone's face, I feel like I did my job. So,
right.
So that was kind of the case with this guy. And anyway, lo and behold, he says, "Hey, he comes in a couple weeks later. He says, "Hey, I was in here. You remember me?" I was like, "Yeah, I remember you." And he's like, "Do you golf?" And I was like, "Well, kind of just started playing golf and not really good at it." And he goes, "Well, do you want to go to the driving range?" And I was like, "Sure, yeah, let's go to the driving range. Yeah, that's fine." And so we go to the driving range, and while we're there at the driving range, he says to me, he's like, "Listen, you have a certain skill set that not everyone has. Do you know that?" And I was like, "Yeah, okay, I've kind of heard that in the past." And he's like, "I really think you need to do this." And, it tells me about Quickstar, which is now, or was Amway, now Quickstar, now it's Amway again. I don't know. Anyway, so it's this whole pitch, right? Well, I can't do it because I'm newly married. Like, my daughter's not even alive yet. And he wants me to invest in like $700 to do this program. Yeah. $700 is, it's a lot of money now, but even back then, like young married, like $700, not in our budget. No, we didn't even know what a budget was back in those days. Probably. Yeah. But my point is that they used that hook to try to get me in. And so I cannot wait to listen to those. So I'm going to be a fan of that already. So I'm fanboying out right now on that show right now. So we'll get excited about that. But back to this.
Such a big deal.
Yeah, back to this. So I'm wondering, do you have a truce moment in your own life, like with God? Because I know for me, when I think of the word truce, I think of two sides who've decided to call it quits, right? They've decided to come to kind of an agreement. They're done fighting with each other. They're going to commit to working things out, taking a breather, as some definitions have said, come to some kind of peace deal. So do you have in your moment or in your life experience where you had that moment with God where you finally just said, you know what, I kind of give up?
Like I said, I'm a wrestler. Like I'm always wrestling with things. And so, I mean, by the grace of God, I was born again at 10. So I, came forward during a play called Heaven's Gates and Hell's Flames, which is exactly what it sounds like. And people say you can't, that stuff's no good for salvation. It worked for me. Praise God. You know, it was really great. But I honestly, like I said, I'm a wrestler. I keep coming back to my point is not to be right, and I can be angry sometimes, but really a relationship with Christ is about surrender, much more than having a truce. It's much more about saying, you know what, I just have to trust that you're much smarter than me because you have all of the knowledge in the universe, you know, and I don't. And I think I'm constantly coming to that realization in my own life because, you know, I've made movies, I've written books and stuff, and it sounds very impressive, but none of them have done particularly well financially. Bringing Up Bobby was seen all over the world by hundreds of thousands of people, but we did not make much money on it. And so I had to live with my parents, and I was recycling scrap metal for money. And to make truce, I drive a school bus, and then I work, you know, insane hours to try to make the show. So I'm working, you know, 65 hours a week between all my jobs, trying to make all this work out. So a lot of my struggle with the Lord has always been that, Lord, you've given me this opportunity and these abilities to make these projects, but why can't I make them full time? And that's been the struggle. But again, for me, it keeps coming back to it's not a matter of a truce; it's a matter of a surrender. If you're if you're seeking a truce with God, it's going to be rough for you. But if you're willing to surrender to Him, you're going to find that's much better. It's much more relaxing to, as the song says, trust and obey. And so that's the thing I keep coming back to is, Chris, just surrender.
Yeah, I just was curious because for me, you know, again, my background too, you know, I grew up in the church, and, you know, I think I was in every stinking Easter play, Christmas play. You know, now being an adult, you know, I'm sitting in home groups. That's what we call our little small groups at church. And, you know, everybody looks at me and they're like, what's that verse, Neil? You know, it starts out blah, 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 blah. I'm like, oh, that's, you know, blah, blah. That's what this is. And they're like, well, you know, what do you think of that? I'm like, well, you know, back then you got to think culturally, you know, and I'm like this, I don't want to brag, but I sometimes feel like the smartest guy in the room, and I hate that, right? You know, because at the same time, it's like, listen, guys, this is it's just the way I was raised. And so from that standpoint, I have that biblical knowledge behind me, you know, and I think for me, you know, you can't, like you said, you can't have that kind of truce with God. You almost have to have that surrender moment. And that's what I'm trying to even instill in people that I know is like, listen, you can come to kind of that middle of the road and be like, listen, okay, can we work this out? You know, but no, there has to be that surrender moment. And I think when people don't have that moment, it's just really hard for sure.
It is. Yeah. And I mean, we want to hold on to stuff that God hasn't called us to. And I am extremely guilty of that right now. I mean, I'm struggling with an overeating problem, especially as we're recording this. We're in the middle of the coronavirus lockdown, and I am sitting near food all of the time. And I'm trying to deal with that struggle with gluttony, and I don't want to give it up. But that also means I'm going to get really fat, and I'm not going to be capable of doing the work that God has called me to do. And so it's a struggle. My flesh wants to keep doing what it wants to do, but I have to surrender. It's worth the struggle. It is. I mean, we're all caught up in destructive behaviors. You know, I have an anger problem sometimes because I often think I'm right for a guy who has a show that is not encourage people to not be judgmental. You know, like I struggle with always wanting to be right. So like there have been a couple of times my boss at the bus barn has pulled me aside to talk through things because I've got a really bad attitude about stuff. So we all struggle with that. But like actually maybe that's a good example because I get this high and mighty thing. I used to be a filmmaker. I used to work in Hollywood. I have a podcast that I think is really pretty great. And every day I get humbled and have to go back to this bus barn and drive a school bus. And it's one thing to be good with 1 or 2 kids. It's a whole different thing to be great with 60 kids that you can't see and you're 40 feet away from. And you're responsible for, and you're driving a large vehicle in narrow streets. It's hard to do that. And the realization I keep coming to, because I fail at this all the time, is that I can either be angry about my job and be angry at my boss who has given me this job, and it's not his fault that I took the job, or I can surrender and do the best job that I can and serve in that moment. And that's the thing I keep getting called back to. It's like I can either struggle where I'm planted, or I can surrender and just do the work of the Lord. And maybe that's the struggle I'm in right now.
Yeah, buddy, I can relate with you wholeheartedly. You know, I have an executive producer, and him and I, he's recently changed jobs, but I still work for the corporation, you know, the empire, as some people might even call it. And not only that, the department I work in, I'll just say it, here we go, ripping off the Band-Aid. I work in collections.
Yeah.
So let that sink in for just a moment, right? And so for me, and much like you, I would imagine, you know, we work these jobs and we're like, God, what are you doing in this moment? What are you doing? Like, this is not my lane. This is not my passion. This is not my wheelhouse. This is not what I want to be doing. I want to be doing this. So that leads into my next question. If somebody right now, much like us, from the sound of it, is right where we are as well, and is stuck in that moment and saying, listen, I don't know what's next. I don't know what to do. What advice would you tell them as a creator and innovator that you are?
Oh, innovator. I don't know about innovator.
Come on, that's what you are, Chris. Be honest. You're an innovator.
Yeah, okay. But I don't know. I think the main thing is trust and obey the Lord. Also take small actionable steps, because I know they say this and it sounds trite, but like every journey begins with one step. So if I've been actively applying for jobs for quite a while now, for months and months. I have not gotten any of them, but it depends on the situation of life you're in. If you have a dead-end job that you're working for minimum wage, it's a very different thing if you're like me, where you have, decent pay and retirement benefits. If you're just working minimum wage, you got to get out of there, because that's terrible. I don't know. It's so big. It's such a big question. I could do a whole season of my podcast.
I'm sure you could, but maybe I'll bail you out. One host to another, I'll bail you out here. So my thought is right, there's some, like you said, there's some actionable steps someone could take, right?
Yeah.
And so maybe first step is to realize, maybe kind of go to God and that surrender moment, that white flag moment. I love that Chris Tomlin song. Not a huge fan of Chris Tomlin, but I do like this song. He says, I raise the white flag. I surrender all to you, all to you. We raise our white flag. The war is over. Love has come. Right. Your love has won. That's Chris Tomlin's white flag, by the way. Yeah. I found that just for you because, it's kind of incorporating into your logo. Nice. So, but my going back to this, like you're talking about the youth back in the day, starting at the top of the stairs and running down the stairs. So what would be step one maybe, and maybe let's give like 3 or 4 steps. Like somebody could say, hey, step 1 is surrender, right? We got that nailed down. So then what would be the next step?
Gosh. I would say, take a first step. But then identify what your real problem is a big thing. For me, it's lack of contentment. And I've said for a number of years that if you are content, you have won at life. Because you'll see like billionaires who are completely discontent with their lives. And then you'll meet people who, are barely getting by, who are completely content with life. And those people are so much happier. I think contentment means a lot where it's warranted. Like obviously if you're, going deeper and deeper into debt every day, contentment may not be for you. but realize that is a better goal than millions of dollars. Would be contentment, and like, how do I get to a good, stable place? And then once you've got your sort of action plan and your final goal, how can I get to be content? Then just try to figure out what those paths are. If you're a young person, go intern as much as you can. You'd be amazed, even as adults, like we can go up to people and be like, hey, can I shadow you for a day? I just want to see what you do. If you don't know what to do, go just shadow a bunch of people and see if you're interested in it. And then just read as much as you can. But yeah, I guess it depends. I am one of those people, I am very, very suspicious of the motivational world. The world that says, get up there, get yours, you just got to be positive about things. Cause I think, it has poisoned a lot of our brains. And it's a huge part of podcasting. I think anybody could start a motivational podcast and get 100,000 listeners in a week. I think it's a really, I don't know, it's a strange thing to me.
I think it goes back into your Ponzi scheme, right? Multi-level companies and things like that. But I'm with you on that for sure, because again, like so many people, they're lacking motivation, especially right now. I mean, hello, Corona has locked everyone in their houses and isolated everybody. I mean, I never even knew what Zoom was till Corona. So thank you, Corona, for that. That's about the only good thing you've done for me, Corona. But my point is I think what you're trying to say is the fact that you got to start somewhere. You got to first recognize who you are. You got to first then recognize what's that next step. If I don't like where I am, where am I going to go to then learn how to do that? And then, of course, the last one I would imagine is apply what you're learning, right?
Sure. Yeah. And again, the thing is, I think it's such a gigantic problem. Yes, but just make sure you're not chasing money. You're not chasing fame, but you're trying to get to a place where you're content and you are where you think the Lord wants you to be. I think that's a much better goal. So anyway, yeah.
Good stuff. I like it. It's good.
Maybe that's season 4 of my show. Yeah,
maybe I don't know. We do our seasons. We do about, I think we're like 16 shows, and then we switch seasons. So we're coming to the tail end of ours. So we're excited about that. But my question is for you: why do you think why or why not should Christians defend their faith? Because it seems like you're kind of a proponent of that, perhaps.
Honestly, it may seem that way. I honestly think we do an awful lot of defense and not enough offense. And so, like, what I mean by that is that we're so caught up in the culture wars that we forget that our main calling is evangelism. And so, like, one example, I did an episode about how many people fear Islam, that it's, they're having more babies than us. And so if you go and travel in Christian circles, oftentimes the answer is like, then we need to have more babies. That's the answer. They're having babies. We need to have babies. Well, it's like, no, actually, what we need to do is go and share our faith with people. Even numerically, it works out that it will spread faster than if you have a bunch of babies. And so I think that our calling in the U.S., especially as U.S. Christians, we've gotten off where we're always on the defense that those people hate us. And that keeps us from going and sharing the gospel with those people. So I'm much, I don't know, I'm not a huge faith defender. I'm much more of trying to encourage people to actually share their faith and actually live out their faith. Because I think you don't have to defend it as much if you're just living it out. Because a lot of the things that we think we're fighting for are not actually Christianity. I don't know, that's just my experience. I mean, obviously, when I've shared my faith in the past, and I'm not great at it, by the way, I'm really pretty bad at it. But when I've done it, there are times where people, call into question certain bugaboos or question things about Jesus. But frequently, the core issue is am I willing to surrender? And it doesn't come down to, I almost never talk to anybody about evolution. For all the time we spend on it in the church, it never comes up for me. I don't know why. Maybe that's just me. But I think that maybe our priorities are mixed up in the church, where we forget that what we're offering people is hope and salvation, and we're trying to do it in a way that is pretty aggressive, and is therefore not working. So I don't know. I think that the culture war is counterproductive, which is why my show, the tagline is like, we press pause on the culture wars, because I don't know that it's always productive for us.
I do like that. Tagline. Yeah. We push pause on the culture war. I really like that because again, going back to what you were saying, I just think, and maybe this is what you're saying, maybe not. So if I'm putting words in your mouth, of course, correct me. But I think what you're trying to say is, or at least what I'm hearing you say, is the idea that we shouldn't get so wrapped up into whether you're Muslim, Buddhist, Hindu, Mormon, Jehovah's Witness, whatever. We should get into who Jesus is to me, if I'm being you, right? I should get into sharing my faith that way rather than you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. Let me tell you how you're wrong. Let me show you how you're wrong.
Yeah. Well, and I should be clear. Like there's a right and a wrong, for sure. But the approach, it doesn't always work when you go like, you're wrong. I know better than you. It's because there's definitely the Bible is exclusive, and Jesus claims John 14:6, he is the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through him. So that's a pretty big claim, and we got to hold to that. But so I'm all for that. That we need to stand on truth. But it's those argumentative things where oftentimes it feels like we're trying to convert people to republicanism instead of Christianity. So like even I was at the Podcast Movement Conference with Eric Nevins, who's been on your show.
Yes, we love Eric.
To that
Great guy, Eric.
Yeah, Eric. Cool dude.
The Godfather, as we called him.
Podfather, yeah. And,
that's what I should have named it in hindsight, Podfather. Why didn't? Where were you, Chris? Where were you on that one? Failure, Chris. Failure.
Podfather, yeah. But I was there at Podcast Movement, and because Eric and I host Christian shows, and this is a big secular event. It's not a Christian event, and because we host Christian shows, people were asking us about our shows, and then we would be able to engage in the conversations about Christianity or the church or whatever with them. And almost always, for me, people brought up something with the United States or republicanism or one of those things. And so instead of me being just open to talk about my faith, I was now trying to justify Guantanamo Bay or something. It's just like, that is not the gospel.
How do you... I know you're teasing, right? Like justifying Guantanamo. Like I just don't. Right. That's so hilarious.
Well, I mean, that's maybe an exaggeration.
Right.
But
no, I know, but I believe it's true.
Yeah.
I'm sure it is true.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah.
That's but
the
Trump administration came up all the time, and actually Guantanamo has come up before in talks. But I find that we're frequently defending those things, and we're saying that that's us defending our faith, and it's not. That's us defending political views that some people have. They may or may not be mine, but that is not the gospel. It is not core that people vote Republicanism or Democrat or Independent to be a Christian. But that is the kind of stuff that we associate ourselves with. And that's often what I'm doing with Truce, is trying to point those things out. So I'm all for defending the faith if it means like standing up for what you believe. If you're actually standing up for Jesus and not standing up for the right to drill for oil in shale or on Native American land, whatever your thing is, don't stand up for that stuff. Stand up for Christ. But oftentimes, the stand-up thing is funny because it puts you on the defensive again. But I think that if you're actively out there being a witness, it's a much better stance. Like I have a friend who is in my church. He plays the organ or plays the piano. And he works at the self-checkout line here at the local grocery store. And if you talk to anybody in town, every last one of them knows who Florine is. Florine is this little short Romanian guy who is a bundle of love and is constantly telling people at a secular grocery store, God bless you. God loves you. I'll pray for you. He's constantly being a part of people's lives and inviting them to church. And he's not the president of the United States. He's not, the governor. He has no power whatsoever. He's the self-checkout guy at a grocery store. But this guy is having a bigger witness on people in this town than I could ever imagine having, just because he's being faithful. And I think like having that not offensive strategy, where he's just out there being in people's lives, just inviting them to church, offering to pray for them. And really, I imagine he'd straight up share his faith if he could right there. Just at a self-checkout line. And Florian is my example of what we should be, versus maybe like always arguing about, offshore drilling or Guantanamo Bay.
My dad spent some time in Guantanamo Bay, so that's a little
oh, really?
Fun. Yeah.
As a service member?
Yeah, he's a former Marine, and so he was actually stationed in Guantanamo Bay, did some mine sweeping, I think.
Yeah.
My mom will, of course, correct me. So, Mom, if I'm wrong, you can feel free to correct me. My brother was actually almost born in Cuba, so that's kind of a fun story, too. So, yeah.
Yeah.
I never got to go. That was before I came along. But But you mentioned, if I can go back just a little ways, you mentioned,
Sure.
Driving the bus. You mentioned, being in Hollywood and doing these films and never really seeing a ton of profit from it. You mentioned selling metal to kind of, I would imagine, live and have some funds.
Yep.
And not fun per se, but funds. Yeah, there we are.
Yeah.
And living with mom and dad again, how humiliating that might have been. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I would imagine.
It was.
So did doubt ever creep in? And if so, how did you kind of counteract that doubt?
Yeah. Well, if you watch our movie, Between the Walls, it's not my favorite film. Bringing Up Bobby's much better, but there's a scene at the end where they're burning the thing that has been haunting them the whole rest of the movie. And in filmmaking, there's a thing called continuity. So it's like if an actor has their hand up in one shot and then you're cut to the other side of the room, they should have their hand up still, in the next shot. So things look continuous. So we were shooting the scene outside and it was snowing and then it stopped snowing. And then it was snowing and then it stopped snowing. And so we were in this place where continuity-wise, it's like we really needed a hand there. And this film had been like a disaster from the beginning. Like on neither film did anything go right for us at all. And as much as you'll see the Sherwood Pictures films, and those guys are talking about how God provided constantly. Basically, almost nothing came through for us. And so we're at this burn barrel, and it's snowing and it's not snowing. It's snowing, and I had been away, on little sleep for 6 weeks at this point. I was carrying this movie on my back, and it was snowing and it wasn't snowing, and it was like, God, why aren't you just providing good weather, like one thing to go right for us? And I felt like I had this very strong thing say to me, that verse, or that thing that Job's wife says to him, curse God and die, which is very serious. I mean, I've been saying this in a funny way, but I was in a really low point in my life where I thought I was doing what God wanted me to do, and I was doing this for the Lord and for an evangelistic reason, and nothing was going right. And I felt like I had this voice tell me, curse God and die. And it's at those moments where I have to stand on that surrender, that I surrendered to God. I'm in this thing, and I can't quit no matter how bad things get. That if you are really committed, like I'm a rule follower, which is often to my detriment. But just in life, if there's a rule, I'm going to try to follow it. And I've stood on this principle, on this rule that I'm going to follow the Lord. And there have been dark times like that where it's like, God, okay, you seem to be providing for other people, but you're not providing for me. I'm still going to believe in you. Even, who cares what other people say? Who cares if I'm not going to get anything? I'm still going to believe. And I think that's a really tough thing, but that's what we Christians are called to do, is to believe even when things get really, really bad. And that's not even that bad. I mean, I wasn't thrown into the lions or anything, but it was just like months of difficulty, constant difficulty, and no sleep. We just have to trust in the Lord no matter what. Because if He's truly our rock, He's not going anywhere. We just got to hold on to Him. So,
yeah, when you were sharing that, I was like, man, that just must have been like a really dark time, perhaps.
It was horrible.
I would imagine, you have great joy in doing the movie, but also great heartache and no joy doing the movie. Okay, fair enough.
No,
right.
No, it was one of those. Honestly, like it's one of those things. I look back on the movies, and they were like 5 of the most difficult years that I hope I ever have. They were really, really difficult, and we couldn't get support from anybody, and it was very difficult. And so I don't look back on them with fondness, but I'm glad that I went through that stage. But I don't look back on them as good times. But I know, again, like Bringing Up Bobby has been seen by hundreds of thousands of people across the world on TV and DVD. When we didn't do well in sales in the United States, and I'll tell you this so it doesn't sound like I'm a Downey Clowney all the time.
I don't think you're Downey Clowney. I think you're laughing all the time, which I love. So
yeah. Oh, you have to. Because comedy helps me survive. But we did not do well in the United States. Bringing Up Bobby came out on DVD just as Hollywood Video and Blockbuster were going bankrupt. And so we got our movies in Hollywood Video, and we were so excited to have them in Hollywood Video. And then they went bankrupt, and they stiffed us for all those DVDs, the cost of all those DVDs that were on their shelves. And, again, I was living in my parents' house. I put all of my personal money into this film, and now we had lost thousands of dollars and had thousands of DVDs across the country that nobody was going to see. It was difficult. But at that time, we got this email from our distributor that said, hey, there's this guy in Brazil who wants to distribute the movies. He wants to dub over them with Portuguese. Can you send him a copy? And, we didn't have a lot of money to send him a high quality copy. So we kind of sent him a lower quality copy because that's what we could afford to do. And we got an email back back in, I want to say it was 3 months later. And they had sold 42,000 copies of Bringing Up Bobby in Brazil, in Portuguese, dubbed into Portuguese in, I think it was 3 or 4 months. This is like hands off. We sent that, I think it was a beta tape out to them in Brazil. Yeah.
Somebody's going to have to go Google that. They're like, beta tape. Yeah. Google that, kids.
Well, there are different kinds of betas, but they were like professional beta tape. Anyway, we sent this off thinking, this is never going to go anywhere. We're never going to hear from these people. This is a wasted expense. And then they get 42,000 copies out in like a quarter, which is insane. It's more than we sold in the United States in English. And now it's in Portuguese in a country that we've never been to. The reality is that, like, as difficult as those times were, the Lord may have done something great in Brazil, in spite of my bad attitude, in spite of my thinking that was not in the plan. We didn't make the movie to be seen in Portuguese. But who knows? So that, I guess that is the thing that I hold on to as that was what was beneficial from making those movies, is that who knows, maybe somebody in Brazil heard about the Lord in Portuguese all those years ago. Who knows? So that's the joy of having done those movies. But yeah, they were very, very difficult times for us. Very difficult.
You've never gone back and rewatched it?
No, I do. I think actually Bringing Up Bobby is a very good movie. For like, our distributor was a guy named Rich Cristiano, who's a really great guy. But he would always say, I would love to see Steven Spielberg make a movie for $20,000. Because, you know, Christian films get jabbed all the time. But really, I mean, for $20,000 film, Bringing Up Bobby is fantastic.
If you do say so yourself.
Well, I mean, like, no. Here's the thing. Like,
I watched the trailer.
$20,000
I'm interested. I watched the trailer.
Good.
I'm going to go try to find it. So
yeah,
I'm serious. I'm going to go try to find it.
Praise God. It's on Pureflix right now.
Oh, that's good. Okay.
Yeah. For $20,000 does not cover the catering budget on a blockbuster film. It doesn't. And that's what we tell Christians to do. And that's kind of the state of the arts in Christianity anyway. You've got people who are doing really innovative stuff on basically no budget. And can you imagine what could happen if Christians had a budget? But we don't. So yeah.
I can imagine if I had a budget for my show. Can you imagine if you had a budget for your show?
Oh my goodness. Yeah. if I could have me and one other producer on this show, it would be amazing. Yeah. But I can't even afford myself.
I do know the feeling.
Yeah.
So last question, then I want to play a game because, you know, it sounds like you're a youth guy, you know, you comedian, you know, you love to laugh. I mean, you've laughed quite a few times today. So we'll play a game at the end. So last question, and here it is. How do you want to be remembered?
By my friends, you mean?
Yeah, I mean, just in general, like, I mean, when you're gone, what legacy or what do you hope to be remembered for, maybe, or what do you, I don't know, what do you want to be? How do you want to be remembered?
Shoot, I don't tend to think about that very often. I would really, I think if people would be like, wow, he really made me think about things in a different way, that would be kind of awesome. How about we'll go with that?
Okay. Yeah. I didn't, again, I never know how people are going to interpret, as you know. I mean, you know this better than anybody probably.
Oh, yeah.
You don't know how people are going to answer or interpret questions or read into whatever. So here we are. Yeah. So we're going to play our game Senseless, which is our fun game that we like to play that involves the senses. So I have this little die here, and we're going to roll it for you since you're not here. Nice. Where are you, Chris, by the way? I know if you don't
I live in Wyoming.
You live in Wyoming?
Yeah.
Okay.
I do.
The reason why I ask is one day, so if you want to sponsor the show, here's how you can help. We want to get a map where we can put a pinprick where everybody we've talked to. So that's my goal for the studio. So maybe next year. Yeah. So I
might be the only person from Wyoming, so that'd be a good one.
That's what I'm saying. Like you could get your own little pinprick there, so that would be fun.
That'd be a big score.
That would be Wyoming. A big score. Yeah, I want everyone from 50 states. So that's my goal. Nice. I might if somebody calls or sends in a request, hey, can we meet if they're in Ohio? I'm like, oh, we've already had somebody from Ohio. I feel like we need to get somebody else. They could be like the most amazing guest ever, and I'm like turning them down because they live in the same state that someone else. Okay, so here we go.
Somebody from North Dakota. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm gonna roll on your behalf. So you got a number 6. Everybody seems to be getting 6s lately. I don't know what that is.
Okay.
But number 6 is this. You get to have dinner with one person, dead or alive. Who would you have it with? And they're paying, so.
Wow. They're paying. Oh, man.
So money is no object.
I'm just going to keep saying this. There's this radio producer named Eric Mennel, who...
Not to be confused with Eric Nevins, so let's be clear.
No. I had dinner with Eric Nevins, and he's a delight. But,
so that's crossed off.
Eric Mennel, he's done a lot of stuff for NPR. He helped create the podcast Criminal. He's a really gifted guy. And he was on the Gimlet show Startup. He was a producer for a while, and they did this episode where they were talking about diversity in their organization. And Gimlet's a big podcasting production house, and they were talking about diversity, and they're like, well, I don't know if we've got anybody in our staff who's a Christian. Like, they had Muslims there, they had atheists. They didn't know if they had anybody who was actually a Christian. And he came into the booth and said, like, hey, listen, I'm a Christian, but I was kind of afraid to tell you guys that. And then after that, they put him on an assignment to report on to follow the founding of a church, like a church startup. And this is a secular company doing this on startup. And it's a fascinating series to listen to. But I'm not sure that he's still walking with the Lord because he was really struggling. But I would really, really love to sit down with him to talk about that series, to talk about his other work. Even though other people, would probably say, I'd like to talk to Abe Lincoln. I pick Eric Mennel, but I keep.
Yeah, I mean, no judgment. I feel like I've said that a lot today on your show, but yeah, I mean,
one of those, one of those questions that comes up on Twitter, and people are like, tag the person you want to interview, and I'll keep tagging Eric Mennel. I've done it so many times.
I have not seen that on Twitter. Could you tag next time? Will you tag me in it? Because I want to blow up all the people. Yeah. So I told Eric, well, you listen to Eric's show. I call it a unicorn list. I have one. So here's a little test to see if my wife is really listening to my show. Okay. So she listens to every week, supposedly. I say supposedly because this is going to be the real test right now with you and I. I'm not cutting this out. And she hears the list of names that I list with Eric. And she goes, I kept waiting for you to say my name. I kept waiting for you to say me. And I was like, babe, you've told me no like 1,000 times, like 1,000,000 times. And she goes, I know. But I said to myself, okay, God, if he says my name, I will do an episode with him.
Wow.
And I was like, are you kidding me right now? And she's like, no, you had your moment.
Wow.
I'm like, so mad at myself for that. So
the games the ladies play with us,
right? So full disclosure, honey, I'm saying it again. Chris is my witness. We would love to have you come on. So make this happen. Don't make me start like a Twitter campaign or an Instagram campaign to have you come on the show, honey. Okay, I'm done with my stuff.
Her over and over again.
Yeah, she's not on Instagram or Twitter. She doesn't have those things. She barely has Facebook.
Smart.
But anyway, Chris, you're awesome. By the way, I'm so excited that we got to sit together. I know you're doing so much for the Christian Podcast Association. So if you're a fellow podcaster and you want some help and some guidance, this is a great group to join. And I'm a part of that too, so I can kind of plug our own group there. But there's so many amazing, great people in there, innovators, creators, just brainstormers. If you're struggling with stuff, I know we're kind of plugging podcasts here, but let me do that for a moment. But I think it's such a great tool, especially nowadays, that you get to have a voice, and it's fun to sit to talk to people from Wyoming. I mean, who would have thought I would have woken up this morning or today thinking about, man, I get to talk to somebody from Wyoming. That's cool.
Yeah.
So Chris, one last time, how can people listen to the show? Where can they go, and how can they get in touch with you if they want to know more about your show?
Yeah. So you can listen. It's available on any podcasting app that I've found, and it's called Truce, TRUCE. And you can also listen at trucepodcast.com. It'd be awesome if you'd subscribe. And, of course, if you feel like throwing a little money in the hat, trying to do this full-time eventually. So if you'd like to be a part of that, go ahead and do it. And our films my brother and I made both of those films, I should say. And they're available right now on PureFlix, but they'll eventually soon be on Roku and on Hoopla. If your library has Hoopla, I think it'll probably be like 3 or 4 months until they get on there. But pretty soon you'll be able to watch them from your library.
That's pretty cool. It's also cool to meet with a guy and sit with a guy that made a movie. So that's kind of cool too. Give me some street cred on the playground, if you will. Next to the wall ball wall. So, so Chris, thanks so much for coming on. So guys, thank you so much for listening. This, of course, has been Other People's Shoes. I got to be honest, Chris was so good today. So much insight, so much just energy. Love his laugh. It is very contagious. And let that be a little bit of truth in yourself right now. Is your laugh contagious? Is your laugh spraying out to others around you? And if it's not, maybe ask yourself why. Because really, that's what it's all about, right? Laughter really is the best medicine, especially right now. We need some laughter. We need some joy in our life. So hopefully you can find that in your everyday life. And I just want to remind you, of course, join us back here next week. We're going to have another show next Wednesday. And as I just want to close with this, remember, when you walk in other people's shoes, you really do get a different perspective on life. On behalf of Garrett and myself, we want to invite you back here next Wednesday as we try on other people's shoes. Thank you so much for joining us on Other People's Shoes. Of course, you know I'm your host, Neil Matthews. Thank you again for listening. I want to just get into our sneak preview of next week, because next week ends our 4th season. I'm going to let that sink in just for a moment. Just for a moment. Season 4 is over next week. Here's a preview of next week's show.
You know, to this day, I'm just still so sorry that this is his story, you know, but there's been lots of moments where I feel like he says it back, you know, like, I'm sorry to Mom, and like, I'm just so proud of you. And so I guess that's my biggest thing, is I just want him to be proud of me, like what I've done with all of this and who I am today, because I'm definitely different. I'm a different person today for sure.
To your past and present and future episodes of our show, of course, please visit opspodcast.com. Of course, as I mentioned, that is a great place to come back each and every Wednesday. That's where you can hear our show. Of course, if you'd like to partner with us financially in any way in helping get this message out to the masses, this message of empathy, perspective, being in someone else's shoes, we, of course, would love for you to partner with us financially. We, of course, are a tax-deductible nonprofit organization. So, of course, if you'd like to do that, let's help you out as well. So, of course, we've linked that down in our show notes as well. Speaking of helping us out, if you would like to be a guest, yes, that is correct. If you would like to be a future guest, or you know someone we should get in their shoes, please feel free to call or text us at this number, 203-548-7463. That's 203-548-7463. We are always looking for amazing guests, either you or maybe someone you know. We, of course, would love to sit with them. Speaking of getting interactive and being a part of things, we, of course, are on the 3 major social media networks. We, of course, are on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can find us under the name OPS Podcast Show. That, of course, is a place where you can interact with us on social media. And we do post daily, so check that out if you're interested. And, of course, remember, when you walk in other people's shoes, you really do get a different perspective on life. On behalf of Garrett and myself, we, of course, want to wish you a great week, a blessed week, but we want to say thank you so much for listening each and every week. And again, join us next week as we try on other people's shoes.